I'd like you to imagine that you and I are at work, and one day our boss walks up and says, what are the major stages of system hacking? What should we expect? And as a result of our time together in this nugget, we're going to identify the stages of system hacking, the goals, and some examples of tools that could be used to accomplish those goals. Let's begin. There is quite a bit of fun when we get positive results from footprinting and scanning and enumeration. And with that data, we can take it to the next level, and that is system hacking. And there are 5 stages for system hacking. And really, when we boil down these stages, there's 3 main groups or 3 main stages. The first one I would consider to be gaining access. And that would include escalation of privileges. I mean, ideally, we'd want to have admin rights on the full system or root privileges on the whole system, because we're going to have more power and more control compared to just an ordinary user account. The second grouping I would refer to as maintaining access. And that includes running applications and hiding files that can stay on those systems that will help us to not only get access, but also to keep access. And then after we're done, we'd want to go ahead and make sure that we do the best possible job of leaving no trace. It's like camping. Carry it in, carry it out. When possible, we don't want to leave tracks, including log files, regarding what we've done. Now, in getting access, we may have to bypass some of the existing controls that are in place. I'd like to ask you for a moment, what is probably the most common method for protecting access to a system? What do you have to do before you get in? Think about that for just a moment. And if one of the ideas you came up with is supplying a username and password to get access to a system, you'd be spot on. That's probably the most popular method for gaining access to a system is by a username password combination. So to bypass that technical control of needing a username and password, the easiest method is to get a username and password. And that can be done through a large assortment of password attacks. And as we look at password attacks, we can kind of put them into 4 major categories. Number 1, non-electronic attacks. And with these types of attacks, an attacker doesn't need to really have technical knowledge to crack a password. That's why they're also sometimes referred to as a non-technical password attack. And methods could include shoulder surfing, somebody simply watching you type in a password, or tricking a user through some form of social engineering, or going through the trash called dumpster diving to retrieve username and or possibly password information. A second category is considered active online attacks. And this is where the attacker is directly interacting with the victim's system. And an example of an online active attack would be a dictionary attack, where we have a list of like 11 billion possible passwords, and we're trying each and every one of those through a system, hoping that we can discover the password the user has used. Or we could use what's called a brute force attack, which is generating every possible combination of alphanumerics and special characters in an attempt to discover, by trying it, the correct password that the user is using. Another option would be malware, such as Trojans, spyware, or keyloggers that are recording the information regarding what the user is typing in. And those are all considered to be active online attacks. A third category is passive online attacks. And this is where the attacker is using password cracking, but it doesn't have to directly communicate with the victim's system. And that can be done through packet capturing on the network. So if the user is logging onto an insecure system, for example, FTP or HTTP, and using plain text, if they're using their user credentials in any of that, and we can sniff that and collect it, we now have got the username and password. We could also do a man-in-the-middle attack, where we trick the network into sending the frames or packets to our device before the hacker system forwards it on to the next hop or next device, and as a result, has the ability to see all the traffic from the victim going to the destination. And again, if it's in plain text, it's very easy to see what those passwords are. And then the fourth category is an offline attack. And this is where we have a copy of the victim's password files, which most of the time are not going to be in clear text, but we can then take them offline and then just beat the living right out of it. Using either brute force attacks or dictionary attacks, or to make it even faster, we can pre-compute the hashes with something called a rainbow table, and we can compare the hashes against a pre-built rainbow table to go through them offline very, very quickly. And the more CPU power we have to solve the passwords, the faster those passwords can be resolved. And if we know what the password policy is on the system, for example, that it has to be at least 8 characters long, with at least 1 uppercase letter, with at least 1 number and at least 1 special character, that information can also help us to expedite the cracking of the passwords, especially with the brute force, because we don't have to try every possible combination. Also, if the victim is using default passwords on their systems, That could be another reason that password breaking happens very, very quickly. And when we do get access through a user account, even if it's not admin rights, we can go ahead and hopefully take the user that we have and just take it another step further. And the escalation of privileges, even for an average user, might be possible based on some vulnerability in that system. For example, it could be a design flaw, a configuration oversight, a bug, or a programming error that we're leveraging that automatically says, poof, okay, great. Even though you're Bob the user, you now have admin rights or root privileges, depending on the type of system that we're gaining access to. And then with the enhanced privileges, that lets us go on to the next step, which is to run applications, which allow us to control those systems and get continued access in the future remotely to those systems. And that's this step right here, maintaining remote access. And the applications that may help us do that include backdoors or keyloggers that are recording what's being typed in. So even if they do make a change, if we get those changes that they put in, we'll still have the knowledge of those passcodes. And there's a whole host of software that allows RA, remote access, usually through some type of backdoor into the system that we could deploy and then later use to access the system once again. There's also rootkits that can run and basically hide very low in the operating system so that common off-the-shelf anti-spyware and anti-malware software may not even find it. And all of these, we'd want to make sure that they were hidden so they were not observed so we can maintain that access and maintain that control. There's also software we could deploy that would record audio, either through a microphone that's built in on that system or record any voice over IP type of activity. For example, Skype or other voice over IP applications. And if we like the audio, we can also very likely record video with the right application being installed. So if they have a camera and we can activate that camera, hopefully without a green light going on because we don't want to be discovered, we could record that too. And regarding getting this data out to the attacker, there's lots of options that could do that. We could have an SMTP server as part of our applications that's running on the host. And using SMTP, we could periodically send out emails that contain the information in it. Or you could send it out through some type of a covert channel. For example, let's say he sends out ICMP from the victim's machine and makes it look like an ICMP ping request that's being sent out. However, in the payload of that, it actually has data that the hacker can reassemble and make use of. There's also a process called steganography. And steganography is the process of hiding a secret message within some other type of media, a picture or a WAV file or an MP3 or an MP4, and hide the actual data inside of that bigger object. And the scary thing about steganography is that to the common observer, whether it's a picture or an MP3 or an MP4 or some other type of file, that file is still functional for what it appears to be, even though it's carrying behind it the additional embedded content. And the last step that the attacker/hacker is going to want to do is hide their activities, which may include disabling auditing if they have control of that system, or clearing logs or manipulating log files so that anyone looking at those logs won't be alerted to the activities that took place when the attacker was manipulating the system. And that may include manually clearing the logs, for example, on a Windows system or a Linux system, or having a utility that automatically turns off logging when they start their activities and then turn back on logging once they've completed. And on many systems, especially Windows systems, there's a lot of detail that's kept even in the registry about activity. For example, if a USB drive is plugged into a system, there is a registry change, so that somebody going back and looking at the registry could identify whether or not a USB drive had been inserted on that system. So additional automated tools to help clean up the registry or restore a copy of that registry are also likely to be used by an attacker to help cover their tracks. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.